Hello, it's George from Ireland here. Today I'm going to briefly talk about Italian unification, the lead up to the 1848 revolution specifically, with a view to helping those of you who are studying it for A-level. So first of all, what's the background situation? Italy was then divided into roughly 24 states. I don't mean federal states, these were separate countries. Some of them were duchies, as in ruled by a duke. There were kingdoms, like the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which was the island of Sicily and the area around Naples. There were the Papal States, so the Pope lived in Rome, the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, and the Pope ruled much of central Italy, but it was Papal States, plural, notice, and the Pope sent legates to rule these various states which were further away from Rome, places such as Bologna and Ferrara. The legates he'd sent would be very senior priests who had the title in the church cardinal, but they were called legates in relation to having political power over areas of land. Italy was a very agricultural country, especially in the south. I know even in the UK about half people would have been farmers in the early 19th century, but in Italy it would have been rather higher than 50% of people who were farmers. The Chancellor of Austria at the time was Metternich, and Metternich said Italy is merely a geographical expression. He was suggesting that it wasn't a nation, it was just a place. And as you'll see, Austria was very important in relation to Italy at the time. Northern Italy was very influenced by France, culturally speaking. Quite a lot of the upper class in northern Italy spoke French. Southern Italy had been ruled by Spain for a while, not at this particular time, and more influenced by them. The island of Sardinia, for example, on the west coast, people still speak Catalan, which is a language from Spain. There are very strong local identities in Italy for each region, especially if it had a major city like, let's say, Milan or Venice. So people might recognize they're Italian, but not think it's terribly important to them. A bit like the way most British people realize they're European, but for many of them, that's not a big part of their identity. Okay, what's the second major thing? Well, what were the unifying factors in Italy? Obviously, there's the Italian language, but what we know as Italian is really based on the dialect of Piedmont. And many people didn't speak official Italian at that time. They would speak their local dialect, like Romanacce in Rome, or the Neapolitan dialect around Naples, Sicilian dialect in Sicily, which has got many Arabic loanwords in it. Most people were illiterate. I don't mean that they were not good at writing. I mean most of them hadn't been to school for a single day, not because they were stupid, just because they were poor. That was the case in every country at the time, and Italy was about average for Europe in having high illiteracy, perhaps 60%. One crucial unifying factor was Catholicism. Almost everyone in Italy was a Christian belonging to the Catholic Church. There are very few Jewish people and Protestants. So the Pope living in Rome, as we know, he's the head of the Catholic Church. Let me see. Another important thing to recognize is that those who wanted Italy to unite and become an independent country tend to be liberals or indeed radicals. So what is a liberal? A liberal would believe in parliamentary government, that men should be allowed to vote. In those days they really needed men. Usually they meant wealthy men only, that there ought to be freedom of expression, printing whatever you like in the newspapers or in books, saying what you like, not just on the street or political meetings, in the theatre. Theatre was crucial because this is before even radio. There should be limited government, there should be fair trials, that kings or dukes shouldn't be allowed to simply announce laws or simply send people to prison without trial. People ought to have certain rights to own property. Now, radicals would go further than that and say that not just men of property should be allowed to vote, but all men should be allowed to vote. Radicals tend to dislike having kings or dukes, want democracy, and democracy was still a highly controversial concept at the time. Almost nobody was agitating for women to have political rights at the time. More conservative-minded people who were sceptical of parliamentary government, who wanted dukes and kings to have a real power, Conservatives tended to be against Italian unification and usually had a stronger regional identity. Let me see. So introduce just two of the key figures in this video for the sake of time. One of them was Camillo di Cavour, who was a count from Piedmont, and that he was Prime Minister of Piedmont. Sardinia-Piedmont was a kingdom. It's in the island of Sardinia, and Piedmont, which is on the mainland bordering France. What else about Piedmont? Its capital is Turin, or Torino in Italian, and it included the city of Nice. Nice now belongs to France, I know. Count Cavour, because he had the aristocratic title Count, he was a liberal in his views. He wanted some reform, but he wanted to keep the monarchy. Then the other crucial figure was Giuseppe Garibaldi. Giuseppe, that's Joseph, if that's easy for you. Born in Nice, then part of Piedmont, I know it's now in France. And he was a sailor. He was a man of radical opinions, wanted sweeping political change, not just in Italy, but throughout the world. For his revolutionary activities, he had to flee for his life. He was once sentenced to death. He spent some time in Uruguay. I've seen his house. Was involved in fighting there for Uruguayan independence. So he wanted to do away with all monarchies and allow all men to vote. Another thing is Garibaldi, although he was normally a Catholic, did not want the Catholic Church to have any political role. He believed it should restrict itself to religious activities. And this was another tendentious question. Should the Pope have any secular power? That is, should the Pope have any say over worldly affairs, not just religious ones? The Pope at the time was a political as well as a religious leader. And liberals, and certainly radicals, believed that the church should be just a church, should not be a government. The church tended to be very conservative. Another thing to realize is that Austria dominated northern Italy. The northern Italian states, some of them were nominally part of the Austrian Empire. They had local dukes ruling them who often swore allegiance to the Emperor of Austria, who lived in Vienna. Milan was a quite wealthy city, the most industrial one in Italy. That whole area, Lombardy, or Lombardia, as the Italians call it, was a very fertile plain. And it was crucial to the Austrian Empire in terms of its the revenue it produced, which, as we're going to see, was a spark of the 1848 revolution. In 1846, the Pope died, and a new one was elected. That's Pius IX. As you may know, Catholic priests are not allowed to marry, so they don't have children. So the papacy is not hereditary. Popes are elected by the cardinals. The cardinals are roughly 100 in number, and at the very highest priests, a pope will appoint a number of cardinals, and cardinals select the new pope, usually from amongst themselves. Pius IX was an Italian. All the popes from 1528 to 1978 were Italian. That wasn't a rule, but that was the way it happened, partly because so many cardinals were Italian. They almost always picked someone of their own nationality. Pius IX was known to be a man of liberal opinions relative to being Pope. He seemed to want reform, greater freedom of expression, and Italian liberals welcomed him, thought he could be their champion. Some of them believed, we don't want a monarch as such, we can't agree on who'd be president. Maybe the Pope could be the secular ruler of Italy. As well as being a religious leader, he'd actually be the head of their government. It wasn't to be. Number 7, this is part of a wider stirring of nationalist sentiment throughout Europe. In Ireland, in Poland, in Germany, in Hungary, Romania, there were movements pushing for unity and independence. So you can see the intellectual currents here were spreading from one country to another. These radical notions cross-fertilized. Radicals from different countries met each other and exchanged ideas. Another example was Greece, which only about 18 years before had become independent, broken away from the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was mainly a Turkish/Muslim empire in the Middle East at the time. Some Italians said, well, we ought to be doing the same. So this is part of a process called il risorgimento, which is the Italian for the resurgence. Right, that's enough for this video.